Right now, somewhere on Earth, roughly 5 billion television screens are on. Hospitals use them to calm patients before surgery. Children learn their first words from them. Families gathered around them watch the first human walk on the moon. Ask anyone who invented television. They will say RCA. They will say David Sarnoff. They are wrong. The man who actually invented it was a 14-year-old farm boy in Idaho, plowing a potato field, who looked back at the parallel furrows in the soil and understood, in that instant, how to scan an image line by line with a beam of electrons. His name was Philo Taylor Farnsworth. He died in debt. His obituary ran in small print. Philo Farnsworth was born on August 19, 1906, in a log cabin near Beaver, Utah. No electricity, no running water. His father, Lewis, moved the family repeatedly across the rural West chasing better farmland, better luck. By the time Philo was 11, the family had settled near Rigby, Idaho, on a property that did have one extraordinary feature: an attic full of science and technology magazines left by a previous tenant. Philo read every one of them. He read about electrons. He read about photoelectric cells. He read about the attempts, then ongoing, to transmit moving images through the air. The prevailing approach to television in the early 1920s was mechanical. Spinning discs with holes in them, motorized drums, flickering lights synchronized across a wire. The images were blurry, slow, barely recognizable as motion. Physicists and engineers at the world's biggest laboratories knew the mechanical approach was a dead end, but no one had figured out what came next. Philo Farnsworth had figured it out at 14. In the spring of 1921, plowing that hillside potato field, he stopped the horse. He stood in the furrows and looked back at the lines he had cut into the earth. Rows, parallel lines, and he understood that you could capture an image the same way, scan it row by row, line by line, so fast the human eye would perceive it as whole. Not a spinning disk. Electrons. A beam of electrons sweeping an image onto a screen at a speed no mechanical device could match. He ran to find his chemistry teacher, Justin Tallman. On a blackboard, he sketched the concept. Tallman, to his eternal credit, listened. He asked questions. He saved that sketch. Farnsworth spent the next several years trying to get someone to take him seriously. He was a teenager in rural Idaho with no money, no university affiliation, and no family connections. He enrolled briefly at Brigham Young University after his father died, forced to drop out to support his mother and siblings. He was 20 years old, recently married to Elma Gardner, called Pem, who would become his closest collaborator for the rest of his life. He had a concept that he believed was the future of human communication, and no laboratory, no funding, and no credibility. What he had was the idea, and he had it completely, precisely, and provably before anyone else on Earth. In 1926, Farnsworth convinced a pair of San Francisco investors, George Everson and Leslie Gorel, to fund his research. They gave him $6,000, enough to rent a small lab at 202 Green Street in San Francisco. Pem worked beside him, soldering components, winding wire, running experiments. His brother-in-law Cliff Gardner, who had no formal electronics training, learned to blow glass so they could build the vacuum tubes Farnsworth needed. They were essentially making their own scientific instruments from scratch, because the ones they needed did not exist yet. On September 7, 1927, Philo Farnsworth transmitted the first fully electronic television image in history. It was a straight line, a single scratch on a glass slide. He rotated the slide 90 degrees. The image on the receiver rotated with it. He turned to his team and said, quietly, "There you have it, electronic television." He was 21 years old. He filed for a patent that year, establishing a date of invention that would later become the most important single document in one of the most consequential patent disputes of the 20th century. By 1928, he had transmitted a live image of Pem's face. By 1929, his system was capable of producing 60 frames per second, far beyond anything mechanical television could approach. He gave the first press demonstration in 1928, and the San Francisco Chronicle ran a story with the headline, "SF Man's Invention to Revolutionize Television." David Sarnoff read it. David Sarnoff was, by 1930, one of the most powerful men in American media. He had built RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, into a dominant force, and he was building it into television. He had hired Vladimir Zworykin, a Russian-born engineer, and set him to work on an electronic television system. Zworykin had filed his own patent in 1923 for a device he called an iconoscope. The problem, a problem that would be litigated for years, was that Zworykin could not actually make his 1923 patent work. Not in 1923, and arguably not for years afterward. The patent described an intention more than a functioning device. In 1930, Sarnoff sent Zworykin to visit Farnsworth's San Francisco lab. Farnsworth, open and generous in the way that inventors so often are before they understand what openness costs, showed Zworykin everything, every component, every innovation. He walked his competitor's engineer through the design of his image dissector tube, the core of his invention. Zworykin examined it for 3 days. When he left, he reportedly told Sarnoff that the tube was beautiful and that he wished he had invented it himself. Sarnoff then came to San Francisco himself. He offered Farnsworth $100,000 for the entire patent portfolio, every drawing, every filing, every right to the invention. He also offered Farnsworth a job at RCA. He made clear that this was how things worked. Individual inventors sold to corporations, and corporations brought inventions to market. The offer was not presented as negotiation. It was presented as the natural order. Farnsworth said no. What happened next is a lesson in how power operates when it cannot simply purchase what it wants. RCA launched a legal campaign to invalidate Farnsworth's patents and establish Zworykin's 1923 filing as prior art. The argument was technical and strategic. If Zworykin had described the concept first, even if his device hadn't worked, that might be sufficient to claim priority. RCA had virtually unlimited legal resources. Farnsworth had investors who were growing nervous, and a legal budget that was burning through capital he desperately needed for research. The case went to the U.S. Patent Office. And here the story takes a turn that could have gone differently because the Patent Office actually did its job. The critical witness was Justin Tallman, Farnsworth's high school chemistry teacher. Tallman had kept, for a decade, the sketches Farnsworth had drawn on his blackboard in 1921. He reproduced them from memory during testimony. He described, in specific detail, a 14-year-old boy who had explained the concept of electronic television to him 7 years before Zworykin's 1923 patent and more than a decade before Farnsworth filed his own. The Patent Office examiner ruled in Farnsworth's favor. The priority date was established. Philo Farnsworth was, legally and officially, the inventor of electronic television. RCA appealed, and appealed again. The litigation ran for years. Here is the mechanism of the theft, and calling it anything else would be imprecise. It was not crude. It was not a forgery or a midnight burglary. It was time. RCA understood that a corporation can sustain a legal battle indefinitely. An individual cannot. Every year the appeal continued was a year Farnsworth's patent clock was ticking. Patents expire. The window in which an inventor can collect royalties is finite. RCA's strategy was not to win the argument. They had lost the argument. It was to outlast the man. They very nearly succeeded. When the final settlement came, in 1939, RCA was forced to pay royalties to Farnsworth, the first time in the corporation's history it had ever paid royalties to an outside inventor rather than the reverse. It was a genuine victory. The newspapers noted it. Farnsworth's team celebrated. And the celebration was warranted, because it was real. The Patent Office and the courts had confirmed that one man, without institutional support, without corporate backing, without a university laboratory or a government grant, had beaten the most powerful media company in America in open legal combat. But the victory was hollow in the way that only a victory won too late can be hollow. By 1939, Farnsworth had roughly 6 years left on his core patents. The war intervened, commercial television production was halted during World War II, which meant the period when television sets would flood American homes and generate the royalties that should have made Farnsworth wealthy simply did not overlap with the period his patents were valid. By the time television became a mass consumer product, those patents had expired. RCA manufactured sets. NBC broadcast programs. David Sarnoff was on the cover of Time magazine as the father of television. Farnsworth received a small flow of royalties in those final years. Not small in the sense of modest, small in the sense of insufficient. He had spent years funding litigation instead of research. His health had broken under the pressure. He suffered a serious nervous breakdown in the mid-1930s and struggled with depression for the rest of his life. He turned increasingly to drink. He attempted other inventions, some remarkable, including early work on nuclear fusion, but nothing with the commercial runway to rebuild his finances. He moved to a farm in Maine, then to Salt Lake City. He worked in relative obscurity, occasionally recognized in technical circles, essentially unknown to the general public, whose living rooms were filled with his invention. On July 20, 1969, Philo Farnsworth sat in front of a television set and watched Neil Armstrong step onto the surface of the moon. His wife Pem was beside him. He turned to her and said, "Pem, this has made it all worthwhile." He meant the years, the lawsuits, the breakdowns, the patent battles, the poverty, the obscurity. He meant everything. Looking at the face of the moon, transmitted through the technology he had conceived in an Idaho potato field, he decided it had been worth it. He died on March 11, 1971. He was 64 years old. The cause of death was pneumonia, but the financial records tell a story the death certificate doesn't. He died with substantial debts, his estate worth far less than the invention that had made his adversaries billionaires. Has history corrected the record? Partially, unevenly, in ways that honor the man while leaving the structural injustice completely intact. In 1983, the U.S. Congress recognized Farnsworth as the inventor of electronic television. A statue of him stands in the Capitol's National Statuary Hall, one of two figures Utah chose to represent the state for all time. The Smithsonian acknowledges his priority. The Television Academy has named an award after him. Pem Farnsworth spent the remaining decades of her long life. She died in 2006 at age 98, restoring her husband's name with extraordinary tenacity, giving interviews, speaking to engineers, writing a memoir, refusing to allow the historical record to close on a lie. And yet, open a high school textbook today and look up the invention of television. What you will find varies wildly by publisher. Some name Farnsworth, many remain ambiguous. The cultural memory, the instinctive answer most people give when asked, remains Sarnoff, remains RCA. The corporation successfully purchased not just time in the patent window, but time in the historical imagination, and that purchase has proven more durable than anyone in 1939 might have predicted. The structural lesson here is the one that should be taught in every business school and every engineering department and every policy seminar on intellectual property. A patent is not protection. A patent is a starting pistol for a race between an inventor's resources and a corporation's willingness to spend. Farnsworth won every factual argument. He won the legal argument. The patent office agreed with him. The courts agreed with him. RCA itself, by paying royalties, conceded the point. None of it was sufficient to make him wealthy from his invention, because the legal process consumed the years in which wealth was possible. This is not a story about one bad corporation in one decade. The mechanism Sarnoff deployed, aggressive litigation designed not to win, but to delay, to exhaust, to expire, remains a standard tool in intellectual property disputes today. Small inventors call it efficient infringement. Big companies calculate the cost of the lawsuit against the cost of the license and sometimes choose the lawsuit deliberately, knowing that time is on their side. Farnsworth was not the first individual this happened to. He was not the last. He was simply one of the most clear-cut cases in history, one where we have the original sketch, the testimony of the chemistry teacher, the patent office ruling, the legal record, everything, and the man still died in debt. What Philo Farnsworth left behind is everywhere. The screen you may be watching this on right now, the screen in your pocket, every pixel of every image that has ever been broadcast. He did not just contribute to television. He conceived the fundamental principle, the electron scanning system, that made modern screens possible. The industry that grew from his 14-year-old's insight on a hillside in Idaho is now worth, by various estimates, several $1 trillion globally. His estate received none of it. There is a temptation at the end of a story like this to reach for some consolation, to say the recognition came eventually, that the record was corrected, that history is long and justice slow but real. Some of that is true. But Philo Farnsworth sat in front of his invention at 62 and watched the moon landing and decided it had been worth it. He made that decision for himself. We do not need to make it for him. What we can do, what accuracy requires, is refuse to let the comfortable version of history stand unchallenged. The name is Farnsworth. The invention is electronic television. The year is 1927. Those facts are not in dispute. Only the memory is.